Welcome to Whiteboard Wednesday. My name is Mike Cromwell.
I'm Brian DeVault.
Risk mitigation and the assessment thereof, right? So if you're a member of that board or you're the CEO of a company, how do you first off assess what your risk areas are? A lot of businesses these days have regulatory requirements or standards that must be upheld that if not in compliance result in hefty fines,
Financial penalties or
loss of business.
Right.
If you're not compliant, right?
Correct.
And my
Well,
website
compromise
goes,
in
my infrastructure goes down, right? What's the business cost? Like, what's writing on it in terms of, is it going to affect your ability to continue to run your business? Is there business continuity in place? What's the cost of a data breach? Are there consequences of that? What's the cost of, because of those things, lost clients, lost revenue? Another thing I think about is, if I'm a company that does a lot of business online and my website goes down, what's the cost of lost revenue, lost opportunity?
Grows into a much bigger picture discussion whenever you start talking about all these different aspects of it, right? So you've got compliance, that's very much a regulatory.
You got PCI, HIPAA.
Let's narrow the discussion right now just to talk about PCI, just because it's easier, right? So that's payment card industry certification or compliance, right? And that means that you're going to take all safeguards and measures to responsibly store or not store or withhold or hold consumers' information that if it leaks out could be potentially harmful to that end user or have some financial implication towards them, right?
Right.
So, in a PCI environment, you've probably got like this is probably one of your major components of your business, right? This is your number one concern probably in that environment. Whereas data breach, right, cardholder data, right, which could be associated with that. But certainly, if you fail to pass a compliance examination, then you lose your ability to do e-commerce, right? Whereas in the second, when you've got a data breach, now you have bad actors that have access to and are storing cardholder data, right? So then you have, let's say loss of productivity is attached to that because now your team that is in charge of maintaining and keeping this infrastructure online is now in the mode of recovery, right? And all of this is down. So when you talk about the number of dollars that impact, it's just, it's a domino effect, right? And we've talked about this before when we talked about the effectiveness of onboarding employees.
Yes.
And how much of a financial impact that has on an organization just for loss of productivity or lack of productivity, if you will.
Right.
But either way, you're going to grind whatever business you have is going to grind to a halt in the event of a cyber incident.
Right.
Right. So we had compliance as number one.
And would you put data protection as a separate category to compliance?
Sure. Yeah, why not?
Because one is the compliance standards that are, the compliance.
These are organizationally enforced, right,
by
a third party.
It's the measure of whether or not you're quote unquote compliant, right?
Yeah, so we'll say third party.
And the other one is protection of your data, which is freaking massive today.
Right. And
on a couple counts.
That's a corporate responsibility.
Yep.
It's also an end user responsibility.
Yep.
Right? Like if an end user is doing irresponsible things with your data, are you still liable for that as an organization? The answer is yes, right? But that's where you start to talk about controls that are put in place so that it prevents your users from doing things that wouldn't comply with whatever your governance or your governing body tells you have to do, right? So, I think you've got an opportunity here to say, corporate versus end user, right? Because the corporation has to have a certain amount of governance and control around the data and its protection and how you access networks and everything else. But the end user also has a responsibility there.
Right.
And a lot of times it's the corporate entity that's sort of trying to put mobile device management or SASE or CASB or zero trust strategies in place to protect that. But ultimately, you have to protect the end user from themselves, almost, right? And so, I mean, you got to put that up there, right? This has some impact on us long term. Security awareness training, right, for the end user. Right.
And would you put protection and standards around your architecture and all the, the devices attached to it as a separate category? Does it fall into one of these?
I think it probably warrants its own discussion point.
Right.
Infrastructure security, right? I mean, at a high level.
Because what I want to tie back to, Brian, is as we talk about the risks. You're an investor in a company. You're on the board. You're an executive at a company. What should you be concerned about? And how do you put value on, potential value on these things, which then in turn will drive how big of a priority should this be, and how much of my budget should be pointed at this in 2022, right?
Yeah, I just added 3 more bullet points that are probably higher on a CISO's mind or a CTO's mind, whereas these are probably more CEO or CFO discussion points, whereas we're sort of gravitating down here. We're getting more tactical in nature, right? These are more strategic, big picture. What happens if something like this occurs? Or maybe, hey, compliance is our number one priority. Never make it a possibility to fall outside of compliance. Right? And so those are corporate or high level directives. Whereas you get down to some of these and you get into a lot of detail.
So as we talk about compliance, certainly we've seen companies that say they're PCI compliant, HIPAA compliant, right?
Right.
And there's a series of, you got to go through tests and evaluations of those things,
right,
and get quote unquote PCI compliant certified, right?
Right.
How often do the businesses need to get measured for those? And is there a direct correlation between being compliant and the execution of the plan that protects you against these things?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely correlation between the two. And a lot of times you have a compliancy guideline that sort of determines how the rest of this takes shape. Right?
So if you're running it, if you're the CISO, company CISO, CIO, you're PCI compliant, HIPAA compliant. Can the board rest at night knowing they're protected in all these other areas now?
No, no. So these are going to the HIPAA, PCIs, high trusts, all of those. Those are really saying that you have a framework around how you implement the rest of this. The actual execution, the control, the audit, the measurement, all of those things have to be done at all these individual levels. And so the audit process will certainly make you aware if something's not happening in one of these areas. But what the compliance component up top is simply a framework for how you achieve that security posture that's associated with that compliancy organization, whatever that is.
So thanks for tuning in. We're going to be over the course of the next few weeks talking about actions that you can take if you're an executive in a business, whether you're a CISO, a CEO, on the board, tactics and actions that you can take to both assess your current level of risk, as well as actions you can take to close the gap from being at high risk to lower risk and having a good cut posture in place.
You bet. So we're going to talk about business process, business procedure, discussions you should be having internally, and then hopefully we'll be able to get into some tactical tools and some platforms that you can use to help increase your cybersecurity posture.
And if you haven't already talked to an MSSP, reach out to Netrio. We are certainly here to help. And we can also walk you through what are things you got to look for if you're needing help today and you want to enlist an MSSP. Objective things that you ought to be looking for, tools that you can use to help assess your current level of risk.
Absolutely.
So thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for next week's Whiteboard Wednesday.
Thanks. If you liked our episode today, click here to subscribe. And for other Netrio content, check out our channel.